It's Friday. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Nashville, Tennessee. I hope that fan's not too loud. I'm keeping the AC running because it's actually a little bit warm in here now because of the sun being out. We forgot what the sun looked like here in Middle Tennessee over the last several weeks. It's been raining pretty much all the time, so it's really nice to have a sunny, clear, dry day. So I was working on an art installation all week, and was supposed to be finishing it up this morning, but I ended up being finished with it last night. I was working with a crew here in Nashville called Art Up, and it's a bunch of friends of mine, and we're all frankly, we're all expert art installers and gallery designers and things like that. And you know, like I said, we got done with this job a little bit early. So this morning, instead of going in to finish the exhibition, I got up and I made coffee for my wife and and then I killed a wasp that was trying to get into my house. He was stuck between the doors, the screen door and the door and the screen door. And then I jumped in my truck and I drove up to the UFC gym in Hendersonville. And many of you know that's where I work out and train MMA. And in my last post, I talked about how being there for about a year and a half now, I've lost 25 pounds and I've gotten off of this blood pressure medication I was on. So it's been very good for me. If any of you guys have thought about, or any of you gals have thought of getting into the martial arts and want to jump into the edge of modern combat out here in the secular world of MMA, as opposed to the traditional small r religious world. This is a whole other subject I'm getting into here now. But and traditional martial arts are interesting too. I was actually just today working on, there's a certain kind of kick that you'll see fighters do in MMA fights. John Jones does it a lot, where the fighter will pick up his back foot, right, and balance on the front foot, and then sort of shoot this darting diagonal sort of across their front knee and at the opponent's knee or shin or ankle. And it's interesting because years ago when I was studying Northern Mantis Kung Fu, okay, Chinese boxing, Northern Mantis Kung Fu, right? When I was studying that, we would do these kicks. Now, I want to look it up later and see if I can find the actual Chinese name for this kick, or even a cool, like, animal name for it. That's one of the things I liked best about Kung Fu, was all the fucking glossary, man. The lexicon of Kung Fu is so fascinating. It's no wonder that, like, you know, rappers, rap acts like Wu-Tang Clan and stuff, you know, have found such an affinity. There's a lot of reasons why, you know, rap and hip-hop and Kung Fu go together, but one of them is because they both have this amazing language, right? So so that's one of the things I really liked about Kung Fu. But anyway, so there's a way you do these kicks where you sort of shoot this little kick from your back leg across your front leg into the front leg of your opponent in one way or another. And we would call them granny kicks, because we would do them, you do it with your hands on your hips, and you sort of twist your front foot, you sort of twist your ankle like out and forward, right, on the front foot at the same time that you're shooting the back foot forward. And that heel turn, so here's your heel, right? You're facing your opponent like this. These are your feet, and your front foot goes cha like this as the back foot lifts up and shoots forward. And as you can see, it ends up being a counterbalance, right? So the back foot comes up, shoots forward just as the other one turns, right? So it's really a cool kick, and it's really very similar to what you see, you know, fighters like John Jones using nowadays. So I love to see the way those things get borrowed. And so when I started screwing around with that stuff, you know, I wasn't even supposed to be at the gym today. So I sort of just, you know, go with how I feel when I'm at the gym in terms of what I'm gonna do. You know, there's certain things I do all the time. I almost always jump rope. I almost always hit bags in one way or another. But then I also do lots of other stuff, calisthenics stuff. There's a system called TRX where you've got like basically handles on these bands, that are connected above you, and then you're able to do all this crazy stretches, and you can do strength exercises, but it's all ultimately body weight exercise, right? So it's an interesting combination of sort of yoga, calisthenics, judo, not judo, but you could actually definitely get, I think it's actually kind of good for things like judo and wrestling, because you really get into this sense of your weight in space. And one of my favorite things to do is just to get down into like a crouch, and then sort of grab the cables, right? And so I'm able to sort of like, just with very little effort, if I jump, I'm sort of already pulling myself up off the ground, right? So you can just put your weight right on them and pick yourself up a little bit with your arms. So you do that, and you just sort of jump around in a circle, and you're sort of letting the momentum of your movement and the fact that you can pull this tension on these things, you turn into like a little bit of a merry-go-round where you take advantage of that centrifugal force. So that's a really fun one to do. So anyway, I just sort of mess around with lots of stuff, and it being Friday and me not even knowing if I was going to come in, I just sort of committed. I committed to, I'm just gonna work out on the bag, and I'm gonna work on technical stuff, and I'm not even gonna wrap my hands because I'm not planning on hitting it very hard. I was kicking it pretty hard. I was working a lot on these kicks, as I was talking about. But it got me to thinking how excited I am about Sean O'Malley's fight, which is coming up this weekend. And Sean O'Malley is gonna fight before the co-main event at the UFC Chris Cyborg, pay-per-view on Saturday night. And Sean O'Malley is a guy who was discovered by Dana White on his Monday Night Contender series, and famously drops this guy with a big right hand punch, and Snoop Dogg goes bananas, and it's one of the like iconic. Really, it'll be like probably the moment that people remember from that first season of that show, if it continues on. I think it should. In a way, I like it better than like looking for a fight. I don't need to see like lifestyle TV with Dana White and his pals. No offense to the gentleman, but like, yeah, just do a cool fight. Introduce me to these guys. And it's better too. I mean, it's in a way you're getting what you need from a show like The Ultimate Fighter on that show already. You're getting just enough of who is this person, why are they fighting, what is their background, what is their story, you know what I mean? You get enough of that. You don't need a whole reality show. Anyway, so Sean O'Malley has become one of my favorite fighters for sure. I love this guy. And even though he's rather inexperienced, when he had his first actual UFC fight recently, I guess, I mean, it's hard to say what is a UFC fight, but basically he's only in his, I think it's his third or second official UFC fight this weekend, but he's already on the main card of a pay-per-view, you know what I mean? So this guy's got a lot of momentum in terms of his fighting career or whatever. But the thing I like about him is the fact that he's very free-flowing fighter, right? He comes out of the MMA lab, which I think is in Scottsboro, Arizona. That was interesting. So YouTube is letting me just keep going on this stream. I lost it, obviously, for a second there. But anyway, it's helping me refocus and talk about what we're supposed to be talking about. So the thing I like about Sean O'Malley is, like I said, he's a fighter out of Arizona at the place called the MMA Lab. And Scottsdale, that's the word I'm looking for. I'm sorry, Scottsboro? What the fuck am I talking about? Scottsboro, is that a place somewhere? It probably is. Scottsdale, Arizona, I think is where the MMA lab is. It's not that far from where my family lives in Sedona. And next time I get out that way, I would like to find the opportunity to go down there, if it's open for that, if it's open for just folks off the street to come in and pay a fee and work out for the day. That would be cool. I don't know what kind of a place it is, if it's exclusively for professional fighters or if it's, an open gym where there's, people like me there training just because they love the martial arts and they want to be in shape, or, if there's amateurs there or whatever. So I have to learn more about it. But some of you know that I do a podcast with Brian Siskin called Art Fight Podcast. And maybe that's the kind of thing I could get in there and talk to Sean or talk to his coach. I can't remember the coach's name there. And then Sean recently has been talking about another coach that he works with there. So there's interesting things going on down there. Alex Caceres is a fighter out of that same place, and so is Benson Henderson. And all three of those guys are pretty unique, loosey-goosey, free-flowing fighters, and I really enjoy them all. Probably Sean O'Malley most of all, although I always liked Alex Caceres' personality. He's a bit like John Dodson in the sense that he's like always smiling, you know what I mean? And he's got this real, but Alex's thing is a bit cooler. Alex has, he's got his big afro. He calls himself Bruce Leroy, right? Which is awesome. He looks like, I think his name is Jim Kelly, the black fighter who he was a karate fighter in real life, and he is in Enter the Dragon with Bruce Lee. I think it's Enter the Dragon that he's in, but he's like one of the guys who's like on Bruce Lee's side, I believe. I don't think Bruce fights him, or maybe he does. I don't remember. But anyway, that guy was kind of a big deal in the martial arts world. To have this black African American martial arts star really in these Bruce Lee films, and he went on to make several of his own movies as well. He actually didn't die very long ago. It was just kind of, I want to say in the last 5 years he passed away. But Bruce Leroy sort of looks like him, so he's got this real iconic look, and he's a very good fighter, and I've seen him submit guys, he's finished guys, and he'll do all sorts of cool techniques. Like he'll take chances and sort of like let himself find his way through the fight with this sort of groovy sensibility, like Groovy Lando, for instance, like Yair Rodriguez. Like all those guys are just really they're not the guys who are going to win every fight, but I don't really care. It's like those fighters who you don't care if they win. Donald Cerrone is sort of a fighter like that for me, although Donald Cerrone is a much more sort of stricter fighter than these guys are. These guys are like I say, just it's like you never know what Bruce Leroy is going to throw, or certainly what Sean O'Malley is going to do. O'Malley's really interesting in the way that he'll switch stances all the time, and he's got really interesting ways of managing distance, and I really like what he does when once he's in and he's in range to strike. He'll do really interesting things, like he'll leave a punch in somebody's face as he's making his move out of the pocket, you know what I mean? So he does these really smart things that are rather unorthodox, and you don't see a lot of it, but fighters like O'Malley are bringing really interesting new perspectives and sort of attitudes and creativity into the game. And when I was watching I guess it was the embedded UFC embedded video that's going on this week, they interview Sean, I think in the second episode, and or this might have just been a video I saw on YouTube, but somebody was interviewing him, and he was talking about the fact that he always had coaches who were always telling him like, no, you got to put your hands up, no, you can't lean that way when you're doing that technique, and that the coach he works with now, and I wish I could remember his name, but the coach he works with now is a guy who was like the first coach who let him do what he wanted and said, okay, you want to do that? Let's do it like this. You know what I mean? Let's do that, but let's set it up with this. And then you'll be able to do that, And so he was somebody who saw the value of what Sean was doing, and then was willing and able to pick up from there and move forward. You know what I mean? And really smart, very, very smart coaching, it seems, because certainly Sean's having a fair amount of success. And I don't know if I got around to saying this, but the last fight that he had, I think it was his first official fight in the UFC, right? He did very well, and he looked very good, and he had clearly grown and evolved since the last time we saw him. And I think with somebody like Sean, who's as young as he is and as green as he is in terms of his, you know, he's just now gotten into the UFC, so you know he's had fights, and you can see a lot of them online. You get on YouTube and start looking up, you can find a lot of his old fights, and there's, you know, they're interesting fights for sure. Well worth checking out. But he, you know, the worry is that, you know, the hype isn't deserved and that he's going to go in and embarrass himself, right? But so far, so good. Like in the last fight, he certainly did not embarrass himself. And like a lot of the, you know, MMA and analysts and stuff that I listen to, it's interesting because the tone on O'Malley was cautious, you know, coming into the last fight, you know, in that community. People were sort of like, man, I dig what this guy does, but I worry, you know, that, you know, as his class of opponent gets better, you know, is this guy's stuff full of holes, basically? You know, it seems to be like full of holes, right? So somebody could take advantage of that, you know, and really make a mess out of what he's trying to do. But, you know, like I said, he came in the last fight and he was, you know, definitely much better, much, you know, growing. And that's the important thing, you know, because I think, you know, you got to show that you have that potential to get a lot better. Sean O'Malley ultimately has to get a lot better if he wants to be the king of his division. I think he's like 135 or something like that. So if he wants to, I guess he's a featherweight, is that right? That'd be 145 though. I think he's a bantamweight. You know, it's really interesting. I think he's a bantamweight. I should know this. But is that what we even call him? Is it a flyweight? He can't be in DJ's division. He must be down there with like, I'd love to see him fight Dominic Cruz. That'd be cool. But anyway, but O'Malley he's really tall though. He's like 5'10". I'm 5'10", you know, and I just, you know, lost 25 pounds to get down to like 180 basically is how big I was, you know, so it's weird to think of me even like 50 pounds lighter than I am now. That'd be crazy. But he's got a slighter frame, I think. He doesn't have, his shoulders are narrowish, and he's very lanky dude. And there's something about that style of fighter too. That physical type, really is an interesting one for mixed martial arts. You know, any kind of kicking sport, it's always interesting to see these long-limbed fighters. John Jones, again, here we come back to John Jones. We're not going to spend a bunch of time talking about John Jones, but you know, it's hard to avoid talking about John Jones when you talk about martial arts because he was so amazing. I'm talking about him in past tense. What Sean said, you know, in that interview where he talked about his coach being the guy who trusted him essentially and said, okay, you're doing this thing. I think I see how this can be evolved and grown and can turn into like a legitimate style for you to engage, right? And it reminded me a bit of something I had heard Firas Zahabi recently say. Firas Zahabi is the coach at TriStar Gym up in Toronto, I think. And, you know, he's always been in George St. Pierre's corner, right? So he's been at the highest heights. He's now working with people like Rory McDonald and George St. Pierre. They had a pretty good win recently. But he was talking in one of his recent YouTube videos. You should follow him on YouTube, by the way, if you're into this kind of stuff. Firas Zahabi. I think it might be Coach Zahabi on YouTube. But you can find him. But he talked recently about the fact that, you know, when you're training, there's sort of a choice to be made, or there seems to be a choice to be made, where you're saying, okay, do we take the things you're good at and make you better at them? Or do we take the things that you're not good at and make you better at them? You know, where should we spend our time? Should we spend our time making your striking even better than it is now? Or should we spend time learning how to defend takedowns, which you're terrible at? And I think for us, ultimately, was saying, well, you have to really do both. Like, you have to do both. But he also came around to emphasize the point over and over again, which I thought was very interesting. Emphasize the point that you should essentially accentuate your strengths. You know, that the things that you're already good at should be the guiding path forward. You know what I mean? So if striking is your thing, then you should be a fucking striker, right? And you should build a game around that striking, okay? And in Sean O'Malley's case, obviously a striker, but a particular kind of striker. It was really sort of more about his approach to striking that some of the coaches weren't jiving with, and that his coach ultimately said, we can do something with this. Like, I'm into it, man, and I think you're onto something here, you know? So that was interesting to me, and it makes me think about things, you know, because to me, this is one of the most important things about training martial arts, is that you get these kinds of insights into the practice of the martial arts. And almost always these insights are applicable to any kind of self-improvement or any kind of, you know, success path that you may be pursuing. You know what I mean? Certainly creativity. You know, I mean, this is really all about creativity. This is almost like, you know, a painter or something going to different galleries, and they're saying, you know, well, we're really into abstract painting, but you can't do it the way you're doing it. Like, you know, if you want to get your paintings in a gallery, they have to be a certain kind of abstract painting done in a certain kind of way with a certain kind of medium on a certain substrate, you know, and, you know, presented, you know, in a frame or not with a frame, you know, whatever the style is and all this stuff, the taste of the moment, you know, in both, you know, the fine arts, the contemporary fine arts, and interior design and collectability, and all these things come into play, and you're not the right fit for all these reasons, and you should change, right? So that would be the creativity sort of example of it, the art world, visual art world example of the same kind of thing Sean was facing. Gallery after gallery telling him he's not the right fit, and you have to make these adjustments so that you can fit in. And then suddenly walking into some place, and some guy's like, hey man, I dig your paintings. I think they're great. And I can help you build an audience for these paintings. I can find a way to help you make money selling these paintings, because I know who will buy these paintings, who will appreciate them. So you know, that would be a career sort of example, you know, you know, or maybe it's a thing of you know, getting curated in a museum or something would be in a you know, bought by a museum or something. That would be, or shown in a museum show. That would be the equivalent of you know, winning a fight, basically, for a visual artist. You know, if you got included in a show in a museum, that would be like, yeah, nice finish, you know. So or you know, whatever, you're a band putting out a, you know, a single that, you know, gets a lot of attention or something, you know. But it's a reminder that, you know, that sort of we may, in trying to improve our skills as creative people or as martial artists or whatever, it's important to hold on to who you are, right? It's important to hold on to who you are, right? At the same time, it's important to let go and evolve and continue on. And those are good reasons, I think, to, you know, let it be okay to change. You know, if it's about evolving creatively or evolving as a fighter, then O'Malley needs to learn how to change as well, you know, and maybe he will start to embrace, you know, a more orthodox, you know, defensive style of fighting a little bit. I don't see him doing much of that, but you could see things changing a little bit, you know. It's like Conor McGregor, you know, he starts to realize that he's got this gas tank problem, and you don't see him coming out in the first round and throwing spinning hook kicks that much anymore. You know what I mean? He would throw like fucking capoeira kicks and shit, you know, in the first 30 seconds of the fight. And it was cool. I mean, it was cool. If they'd landed, then that would have been something else, you know. But you know, you don't see him doing that anymore, because he realizes that, oh, wait a second, like that's precious fucking fuel that I've run out of before, and I gotta not do that, you know. You saw, like, in the Eddie Alvarez fight, you saw McGregor really, I mean, perfected. I mean, in a way, you know, he may develop different skills and his style may develop and evolve, but really it was sort of the culmination of what you know, Conor McGregor in the UFC especially has sort of evolved into. You know, when he fought Eddie Alvarez, there was there was a certain kind of perfection to it. I think there's a moment where he slips or something in the first round, and like literally slips and falls. But but after that moment, and certainly really in the engagements, that he and Eddie are having, there's something fucking perfect about the way he does that. So there's a time, I think, for letting go of what our style is when our style needs to evolve, and that's sort of the constant emerging of a creative artist and the body of work that is reflective of that. But to change yourself, in order to fit the marketplace or something like that, I totally understand where Sean's coming from. He's coming from the point of view of somebody who wants to be a creative fighter, wants to be a martial artist. There's a reason why we use the word artist, right? So just like a painter, just like a bass player, just like I'm trying to think of some ridiculous category of art. There's a bunch of them actually, but whatever. You're a art filmmaker, whatever it is that you're doing, poet. You want your work to be an expression of yours. You should anyway. I think I'm a huge believer in the primacy of the self in the artistic practice. It's interesting because I had a discussion with Brian Jobe the other day. Brian Jobe is a artist and a curator, and him and his wife Carrie have a organization based in Nashville called Locate Arts that's designed to sort of highlight and promote Tennessee as an arts destination. Okay, so across the he's connected throughout all of the urban centers in Tennessee and beyond and in between, and everywhere across the state. They've really found a way to connect all of the arts communities to be found here in this interesting way. And he and I were having a talk about some of the plans that I have for my Pikes Project photography project. If you live here in Nashville, you might know that I have a photography project where I'm documenting these historic roadways in Nashville, and sort of, there's a whole bunch to that. But if you go to Instagram at Pikes Project, you can find out more and link to the actual photo essays that I've made, etc. So we were talking about some things regarding that, and we were talking about how the difference between like the 21st century is sort of like the time of the lone madman artist, superstar genius, individual, person, man, very often, and that now the concept of what an artist is has changed a lot. And one of the things that's changed about it is that, most artists now are, they're involved in a much bigger project than just, I'm the crazed, intense, lone voice, screaming, my rage on the canvas or whatever, this whole cliche. That's changed into, an artist is most artists that I know of are just as much curators and community. Art is bigger now. Art's turned into, a thing that engages communities of various types. For the most part, that's really what art does now. And art's not as exclusive as it used to be either. It's still there in certain institutions can't shake it for some reason. Museums and galleries have a hard time shaking the exclusivity that they represent. But most artists aren't limiting themselves to those types of venues. Most artists, that I know and respect, they're reaching past that and beyond that, and they're finding ways to make art more accessible, not only for other people to engage with it, for an audience to engage with it, but also for other creative people to engage with it. There's almost, it's sort of like the way that the internet's changing from the internet's slowly but surely going to become decentralized and open source. That's all going to end up, that's going to win in the end. It looks like it's lost the battle, but it hasn't. These old ideas of how the internet and how our digital culture should work, they'll eventually be undone, by transparent open source systems like the blockchain and things like that. So it's sort of the same thing. The art world is slowly but surely, regardless of whether galleries and museums can keep up with it, the art world is slowly but surely turning into something that's far more democratic than it used to be. Now, you can argue too that there's also a thing where after 2008, the art market really sort of exploded in a way even bigger than it's ever been before, as far as I know. I think that's the way the numbers are. I know the 80s was a huge boom, but certainly the money that's being thrown at art in the new millennium is much greater than what could have even been possibly possible in the 80s. So there's that aspect of it too, and certainly that's completely plutocratic, right? There's nothing democratic about that. That's absolutely the situation where incredibly rich people are able to buy these outrageously exclusive things, right? That's 100% true. But the best artists again are somehow finding ways to bridge the gaps between these things. It's like, yeah, I am being collected by this museum. Yes, this wealthy, important collector has, bought several pieces from my body of work, my last series or whatever it is. But I'm also going to go do a thing on Saturday in a public park where we're bringing, middle school kids from across the city to participate in this, massive, project of some kind, blah, 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 So, or, some kind of other, publicly engaged thing. I know lots of artists who, they've got national reputations, and they are, being paid very well, to do commissions. They're being paid very well to, to sell their original artworks or whatever. But at the same time, you'll go driving through Nashville and all of a sudden you'll see like a crazy wheat paste poster image, in a sequence or something like that. And you'll be like, oh, damn, that's so-and-so. You know what I mean? Because you know what their stuff looks like and you realize that's them. So last night, in the cover of Darkness, they're out, doing illegal graffiti projects. Because for them, those things are just as important, and the form and the space and the engagement with an audience that's driving by, like that's just as important to them, and that's just as important to those artists, to operate on that level as it is to operate on these other, higher levels, So I think that that's a big part of what's happening, in the art world, and all of that might sound like something other than this sort of like individual, the super ego genius, fucking Jackson Pollock, kind of American, especially ideal of what an artist is supposed to be. But you can even think of like Francis Bacon, and I'm trying to think of other people. Again, I have to admit that, one of the things that is emblematic of that perception of what an artist is that it's a man, right? So that's one thing. Even if it's, not always a white man, it's definitely a man. I'm thinking about Diego Rivera as another great example of this giant monster, So Picasso is a perfect example of that. Van Gogh, of course, is a great example of that. So there's international examples as well as American examples. But here's the thing. Even though we're moving away from that perception of what an artist is and how an artist works, it's 100% important, absolutely 100% important, that the artist retains their self-expression. You know what I mean? There's just like with a chef. You know, when you see an incredibly good chef, one thing a great chef has in common with another great chef is that they're both translating something of themselves. You know, there's something of themselves in that food, whatever that might be. You know, they're an outlandish personality, and you can see that in the way that they do their plating. They're a guy from a country like Mexico or something like that, like Diego Rivera. If he became a chef, and if he decided that what he wanted to do was a certain type of Mexican food from his region or whatever, then you would say, oh well, this is an expression of his understanding of this food that he grew up with, and that he, has refined in some way that's unique and interesting. So that's always going to be important, whether you're a musician or a fighter or a poet or whatever. It's always going to be important to have a voice that is your voice, and to use that voice to create your work from. And I really just feel like, Saturday night we're going to see Sean O'Malley doing exactly that. And that from that example, and also from this idea that for us a hobby has, that you should let let the thing you're inclined to do lead the way. That's the thing that you should be focusing on. If that's what you'd like to do, if that's what you do, and that's what you're good at, that's part of it too, is, but in my mind, the things that you're most passionate about, most interested in, inevitably those are the things you're good at, because those are the things you're preoccupied with and you're doing them. And the doing of things is how we get better at the doing of things. So I feel like, those examples that I've recently been stumbling across in my own practice, and in my own sort of ongoing obsession with learning more about martial arts, I feel like, those examples are things that I'm now thinking more about in terms of, what does this mean for my music? What does this mean for my photography projects? What does this mean for my critical writing projects? What does this mean for my blogging or whatever, in what ways am I putting... In which ways am I following my strengths and following my inclinations and my passions, and letting them embody this sense of self-expression. So anyway, think about it. What are you good at? What do you love? Another thing that's come up for me recently, and it goes along with self-expression, but there's something about just actually being yourself and sort of discovering things in yourself that you feel a little shy about, or a little like hidden about or something, and finding ways to put those things on display, put those attitudes on display, put those ideas on display, put those tendencies and whatever, put that stuff, put yourself, on display. Don't have aspects of yourself that aren't being expressed and understood by other people. You know what I mean? Put it all out there, and people respond to it. People respond when you do that. Like I said, I think it applies to a cage fight on a Saturday night if you're Sean O'Malley. It applies to any kind of creative endeavors you might be on, and I really feel like it applies to how to be a more successful person, how to be a healthier person. You've got to find your way through all of these kinds of challenges, and the more that you understand what your way is, the easier it is, because then okay, this is my way, so that's how I'm going to do it, and that's going to be the way that's going to work best for you. I really truly believe that. So anyway, so best of luck to Sean O'Malley on Saturday night. I'm just ranting and raving. I'm about to leave the gym to go to a grocery store and pick up some groceries for the weekend. So anyway, thanks for listening. And it's kind of a ramble, but But you know, the takeaway basically is that, you know, self-expression is insanely important in everything we're doing, and you reach higher and higher levels of flowing through your self-expression in the things you're doing with your life if you you know, honor the way that you want to do them. You know what I mean? There's a way you want to do them, and that's how you should go about these things. You know, and trust yourself to be the best guide to how to be the best you. You know, it's sort of like you've already got it, and you got to quit letting other people tell you how to do it. You know, maybe you know better. I think you do. And on that note,